the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. With me is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and we are a week into training camp for the Arizona Cardinals. This is episode 448, so we have some takeaways, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. Budda Baker got a new deal, takeaways, what we've seen so far, and just a little bit more of other types. Kyler Murray addressed the media directly for the first time this offseason, so we've got a little bit of stuff to do. More shows that we're going to coming up, of course, but this is what we got in this one. Seth, how is everything going now that in terms of our personal lives with the football work and the other work, it feels like the crap's hitting the fan, not necessarily in a bad way, but in a good way, because our kids are in school, work's busy, you're coaching, and football is back for the NFL, so content upon content upon content.
Yeah, it's just busy, and it's it's a fun time of year, but like you said, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of long days and nights, but it's worth it. Something, football for me especially, like, is something that is all consuming within my life, whether it's being at my kids' stuff or writing about it or coaching it or
talking about it on here or on the original Draft Breakdown podcast.
Right. So it's just nonstop, and it's a lot of fun and something I really enjoy. So, as long as the nights may be, or as long as the days and nights are, stuff like this makes it fun and enjoyable to do. And
the college football season is coming upon us, and so you will have some. It's like pre-draft content coming up as the college football season emerges. But before that, we've got Cardinals in training camp. They reported a week ago. We did our preview last week. But the biggest news, we didn't talk about it late last week. We didn't get back on to figure out kind of a schedule to do the multiple shows. Budda Baker no longer asking for a trade. He gets a slightly new contract. It's not an extension, and it's not a significant raise. It feels like this was just what they needed. And why didn't they do this a long time before now, if this was the case, right?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I don't always pay attention to the media scrums. Did anybody ask Monty that?
I didn't. I do not believe so.
It's always interesting because that feels like the first question, right? Like, hey, why didn't you guys just take care of this in
right? Because unless it came down to, hey, they tried back and forth, like, but this was like the bare minimum.
Yeah, that is fair. Like, what if this was like last minute, like, hey, I just want this guaranteed, and they were like, okay, we'll do that. So, I thought, you look at it, and it's something that you and I have talked about it quite a bit. It's not that we were anti paying Budda. We're always on the side of players and getting paid. But the question we were asking, I thought it was a fair one, was, at what value? What's the value? And if he was asking, and this was, all hearsay and nothing that we, nothing that actually was going on. If he was asking to become the highest paid player or highest paid safety in the NFL, then the answer was an easy no, right? Like, it was just like, well, I guess it was fun having Budda Baker.
Well, and it sounds like, from what Budda said, I didn't go back through and listen to the entire thing, is that Budda really kept himself completely separate from his agent. He said, you handle it. And his agent probably said, don't do anything voluntary. And it perhaps, kind of like Kyler's agent caused problems, that it was his agent that was fishing for the big contract now I know through sources of sources, Budda was not looking for a major raise. Now there's some element to this, and we talked about it on this show, is the fact that, okay, if you're going to be in a bad team, you're going to go through another rebuild, then I either want to be compensated fairly, I want to be paid more, I commit to me financially, or trade me so I can win. But I knew through some people who actually spoke to Budda what Budda was really looking for. He was looking for this year's guarantees. And what's crazy, what was so hard about that? Because we break down what the Cardinals gave him. $300,000 in a signing bonus. That's nothing for signing bonuses. That's the type of signing bonus they give like low-end free agents. They just guaranteed a salary this year now. And I've detailed why that wasn't necessarily necessary, but it's a good peace of mind for Budda. There were protections in place already for Budda when it came to that guaranteed salary, because the Cardinals weren't going to do him dirty like that. There was honestly no scenario in which they would have cut him before the season to have him lose out on all that money. That could it have happened? Yes. There's no way that would have happened. He gets
right, and that's just what felt silly about the whole thing. And I get it that like you want the actual, and this isn't just a bid will thing. Like you want the actual verbiage on a contract that, in case God forbid Tim Patrick is that the kid with the Broncos that fought back from an ACL injury and then blew his Achilles the other day. Like you want that, because like you said, and
even in that scenario, guess what? Budda would have, because they'd have put him on injured reserve.
Well, and
that's money.
And that's my point. Like it wasn't like they were going to do him dirty in any way.
Yeah.
Right. Like that would have just, especially because it's a new regime. Like they probably weren't going to be like, oh, Budda, we'll let him clear injury waivers and then do a waived injury, or clear waivers or whatever it is. And then, so I don't know. It felt weird from both sides that it's happening. But to your point, I've said it 100 times. That's David Mulugheta or how do you say it? That's just his MO. But we're also seeing now, and it's funny that people got on Kyler because Kyler was the same way. Like Kyler had nothing to do with any of it. Like he was, in the background and working out and doing his stuff. That this is kind of the new way that things are happening. We're seeing it with Jonathan Taylor. We saw it obviously with Lamar Jackson, although he didn't have an agent. He was doing it himself. We saw it with DeAndre Hopkins. It's just, this is the new NFL. Things that usually or used to be private even 3 or 4 years ago are now messy. And the 49ers are dealing with it right now with Nick Bosa, right? Like the Colts are dealing with it right now with Jonathan Taylor. Like these things that used to be like, oh, no big deal, that's not happening anymore. And so it's just sad that, and I think you and I have been around enough, have heard about the hold-ins with players and heard about, all this stuff that was happening that maybe wasn't as publicized before, that we're kind of numb to it, that the whole Budda thing for us the whole time was kind of like, from both scenarios, both sides of it, we were kind of like, I don't really understand what's the big deal. Like, I don't understand what's going on. Like the Cardinals aren't going to screw you and not compensate you if you get injured during off-season workouts or, team participated off-season workouts or training camp. And then at the same point, you're like, why aren't you just guaranteeing his salary for this year? If that's
Right.
all
I know there's the element of the whole escrow thing, and that's a stupid thing. But ultimately, like, they didn't give him a raise. He didn't get a raise. He got this year's salary guaranteed. His salary next year doesn't change. He gets $300,000 to sign. He gets $400,000 a workout, basically incenting him to be part of the off-season program next year, kind of like what did with Kyler. Then he can get a $500,000 bonus each year by being named an All-Pro or to the Pro Bowl. You know, he's been to the Pro Bowl each of the last 4 years. So, and there's playing time incentives. So there's per game roster bonuses both years. Basically, he gets $700,000 in new money, just because he gets the signing bonus and the workout bonus for next off season, and then you get another $1 million possible in Pro Bowl / All Pro nominations or selections, and then you get the games played, the per game active thing. There's, nothing there, but it gives Budda more money. It guaranteed him, and now he's happy. This just feels like,
and again, it just feels like sometimes, and we don't know Monty yet, so we can't get on Monty too much, but it just feels like sometimes that they try to do stuff in the way of like, oh, well, we're just not going to deal or do that right now, right? Like, oh, we're not going to do that.
Like last year's Kyler, they just didn't want to do it that early.
Right.
Kyler was like, no, we don't want to set precedent for quarterback deal that early. But if you're going to do the deal anyway, why didn't it matter when?
I know, and it's just such a thing. I don't know. Sometimes it just feels like, and as married guys and as fathers with multiple kids, sometimes it's that thing of like, there's just that stubbornness, right? Of like, oh, well, they told me to do it, so I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do it when I want to, not when they ask me to.
Oh,
and you're like, really? We just can't like get this? Okay, all right.
But it's good. It locks him up.
Yeah, it's over and done with now.
It's done with. Now we'll see about next year, and for the Cardinals side, this was a no-brainer. Like, it didn't make any sense to wait on this because you didn't want to commit to anyone that long term, especially at that position. You just invested a little bit now to back up. And mind you, this was super important because it's also to back up the words that they had about Budda Baker all off season. If they're going to say how Budda is like the epitome one, that like if this has been over and over and over again, multiple coaches, Monty Austinfort, you can't be that glowing about a player who is unhappy about his contract and then not take care of him in some way, because then then it comes across as lip service, like you're saying this, but you don't believe it because you're not taking care of me. Because that's really, the nice words are nice, but when it comes down to the NFL, the only thing that really matters is the financial compensation, because guess what? Because contracts are non-guaranteed for the most part, like the second you are not worth exactly that, you're gone, is how that works, unless you have the leverage in that situation. And now he's got guarantees, and maybe we're going to have this conversation again next offseason, but we'll wait and see. We'll have to wait and see with that. But
it just seemed like a whole lot to do about nothing that we always knew was going to result in where we're at, and it just took longer and more articles that need to be written to get there.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talking Let's talk about our early standouts and takeaways from training camp after a week. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talking Well, we previewed training camp. Now we have a week of practices. The pads came on Tuesday, so they had Wednesday through Saturday this last week. No pads. That was the ramping up period. They could have put pads on Monday after a day off. They chose to do a slower paced one without pads to then lead them up to the full contact and ramped up juice on Tuesday. I was at training camp on Saturday. I'll be there again this Saturday. The schedule that I now have that I've had for the last 10 years at my first job, I used to be able to go to more, but I'm unable to. And I wish there were it feels like each year the information that comes out of camp from observation is less and less, or less meeting. Like, when I go, like to see the playing rotations, who's getting the snaps and things like that, as opposed to standout plays. Because I know that Cardinals on Cardinals, a big play or a bad play could be contributed on either way. And so I don't know what to think. And
it just makes it really difficult, because you're like, wait.
Remember Brandon Williams?
Right.
Williams? He was a stud, and he was terrible. I will say, kind of the one thing that was surprising for me was that the cornerback rotation has been this. Everyone expected Marco Wilson, but basically the number 2 and number 3 corners have been the rookie Keitrell Clark, the 5th-round pick out of Louisville, 6th-round pick, 5th-round pick, and then Christian Matthew. That's, for me, that's been because Matthew, who was a guy drafted not by this regime, not this front office, not this coaching staff, and he's the one that's out there. So that for me, and while some people, one of my buddies was texting me, I saw Matthew got cooked. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't care that much about that based on what I've seen, because it could be for a number of things. But the fact that Matthew and Clark, and we're getting to see it based on, we're not getting a lot of insight about what Jonathan Gannon thinks about individual players, but we can see there's one player that he really, you can tell that he likes, and that's Keitrell Clark, based on things he said. Everything else, he tries to keep it pretty vanilla. He can't help it with Clark.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 guys right now that have, more than anyone, really kind of stood out from a positive perspective. And we can talk about everybody. I mean, honestly, we always can, but like Greg Dortch has again lived up to the hype and looks like a guy that deserves to be getting a ton of playing time. But I tell you what, we said this from the time they drafted him, and I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon. Michael Wilson is a guy that just is different than every single receiver they have on the roster. And sometimes, from a perspective, that is a good thing in their opportunities. But in this case, it's a good thing in that this dude is he loves to play. Like, he loves to be physical. He loves to get out there and compete, and he's got a little nasty to him. He's not the trash talk of like a Tyreek Hill, but he is very much a guy that isn't afraid to let you know that he beat you, or that he made a play over you. And I think, with the undersized guys that this team has, that's a really nice change up and fit for this roster. And it's something I'm going to be, really interested to keep an eye on.
For sure. I've been very intrigued by the fact where of all the stuff that they move around, the one unit that's been the same all through training camp so far, through like the last 2 weeks of the offseason program, is they have remained with the same 5 first-team linemen, which makes it, all it does is suggest that their starting line they're pretty set on, where you've got DJ, Elijah Wilkinson, Yelda Fruholt, Will Hernandez, Paris Johnson. I think there's one caveat that I think Froholt's spot, I believe, is the only one that has any sort of question as to maybe he won't.
Did I see correctly that John Gaines was getting some snaps in the other day as well?
I did not see him with first team, but Gaines was the number 2 center. Gaines has been number 2 center.
Yeah. I should have. Sorry, let me clarify. He was getting snaps in while with McCoy on the side, so not while they were doing warm-ups.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
Gaines has been their number 2, so that has been the second team center. And
so
then,
he gets some work in that way sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I saw it on the Twitter the other day, or the X, I guess we call it now.
I don't call it that. I still call it Twitter.
But yeah, so I saw that the other day, and I was like, I wonder if it and so that's the thing. And then, we talked about the sign Pat Elflein. I feel like he is exactly what we talked about. Like he's like, all right, Froholt and Gaines aren't ready. All right, Elflein, you're in.
Yeah, well, and it is interesting because the contract suggests that, because it's a league minimum deal. He got a really small signing bonus, and then he gets a roster bonus for making the roster. And so they're a guy that he looks like a guy like, okay, if we need him, just in case.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the fact that the offensive line has been the same, it's something we've talked about before. Like, obviously, if there's a key glaring struggling player, you make the move, you make the change. But this early, and especially at this juncture, so much of it is based on continuity and getting to know each other and the little idiosyncrasies. I mean, I can tell you just from like a youth football perspective and a high school football perspective, like you would rather have 5 guys that love each other, trust each other, and work very well together and for each other than you would have 5 guys that are just like unless they're just like all Trent Williams level, all pro type of guys. Like you need guys that fight for each other and that trust each other. And sometimes that outdoes the like, oh, well, and I'm not picking on anybody, but like, oh, Josh Jones is probably more skilled than, is it Elijah Wilkinson at left guard right now? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Josh Jones is more skilled than Elijah Wilkinson, but like Humphreys and Wilkinson and Froholt might have a better rapport with each other. They might be more in sync and in tune with one another. And so then that'll make up for the shortcomings. And it's just something, we even saw it, 2 years ago when Rodney Hudson was first, and they're winning all these games, and those first 4 games before Rodney got hurt, like they looked fantastic. And then Rodney got hurt, and all of a sudden it just became this.
The wheels fell off.
It just became this thing. It was like there was no continuity. Then Justin gets hurt again, and then and it just became a normal type of thing. And so, yeah, it's just, I mean, it's great to see. And then obviously, the elephant in the room, it's awesome that Paris Johnson's just part of it, right? Like,
right. And that's like that. There's no question. Like he's been up there, and yes, and there was questions, and so and it's interesting because like he's clearly because Beacham's Josh Jones, they're not getting any first team reps,
right? And so he's the guy, and it's exciting to see that and be excited about it and stuff, and so. That's a good thing. I think, other guys that have looked good, obviously, it feels like Isaiah Simmons is getting fit into that role, as the kind of deep safety, which is odd, but that athleticism and the ability to be a big body back there and make plays on the ball will, play well. And I think it's kind of crazy what a veteran that knows a defense so well can do. Just seeing Kaiser White, not even like the plays he's making, but just getting guys in line and set up. You're
Isn't it? This is like Jordan Hicks that first year, right?
Right, where they're just like, hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
But Jordan Hicks didn't know the defense. That's the crazy thing is when he came over.
But that's just linebackers. It's something we always talk about with linebackers. Like there's an innateness to the position that outside of, playing quarterback that like you just can't, that doesn't go with all the other positions, and you can't train to do things. And White being a guy that's obviously played in Gannon and with Rallis, it's interesting to see. It's just been, I'll say this too, and I'm interested to get your opinion on it because we have not talked about it. It's interesting the way they're running the camp, because it seems like, and I know this is the plan, but it seems like, they love going incredibly high tempo, like today, for instance, and then really pulling the stick back the next day and letting the guys, do everything that they did the day before, just at, half speed or 25% speed. And then, so they're still getting the reps, they're still getting the mental side of things. And then they're doing, and then on Thursday again, they rev it way back up there and they're like, hey, go, again, balls to the wall, go run through a brick wall for me. And just, it's because we haven't ever seen that before. Like we've never seen the throttling back and like we've seen them take light days, non-padded day, but like just the juxtaposition. I'm interested, like obviously we have no idea because it's the first camp, but like
what do they do?
Right. But what is your feel like? Cause it feels like, and obviously it's first time, first year coaches and there's that bubbling excitement anyways, but it just feels overly different in a positive way. I don't want anybody to think I'm saying it negatively. Like it feels overly different in a positive way.
You know what? It's allowing what it kind of is doing. I don't know if this is like this in other training camps, because the only training camps I've ever cared about have been the Cardinals. Is what you're noticing so far? There aren't veteran days off so far. Like Colt McCoy had a light day and didn't throw the one day, but they're not giving vets just days off. And I think the way they're doing is so they ramp it up and they just bring the intensity down, so everyone's getting the reps, and they're still mindful of body and health. And I wonder if this is, how much of this is rooted in health science, in sports science, in recovery with their new football performance department there, where you've got Buddy Morris there more for recovery, and then you've got all their other trainers and such. But and it creates that message, because and with Bruce Arians like there, with Cliff Kingsbury, is that their veterans would be, they would slow roll those guys, slow roll them. Like Rodney Hudson barely practiced. I mean, I know he was nursing a knee injury, they were trying to get him through, but Fitz sometimes, DJ didn't practice every day. But what we're seeing is everyone who is healthy is practicing every day, and then just this way you're still mindful of the players' bodies, which I'm pretty sure the players will appreciate greatly, and and getting the number of reps that you need.
Well, and it just seems like even Marquise Brown, right? Like he's a guy that's always kind of, hurts the wrong word, but he's always seems to be like nicked up and things like that. And he's in the drills, but or like when they're doing stuff, he's in there doing the walkthroughs or things like that. He may not be doing the full bore stuff yet, but he's a part of it. And it's just like, it just feels like you said, like it's different. It's not just guys working on the side or coming out halfway through camp practice and after rehabbing. Like it's just, I don't know, it just feels really different.
Yeah, it's
I mean, and again, we'll see. Well, yeah.
For me, it's just, it feels a little more intentional. I don't know.
Like I said, we'll
there's something I want to talk about when we get to the Kyler Murray part, but it feels incredibly in sync. Everything is in sync. That's what's happening. But yeah, I like that. Michael Wilson is like, now I've got a question for you. Is this? Are you worried about how Colt McCoy's looked in training camp so far? Because there's been days he's looked, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't look good, man. Like, at the end of the day, it just does not look good. This is the question, and, we're already kind of hearing the murmurs. What Greg Rosenthal was like, there's a, what do you say? How do you say it? There's a non-zero chance that Clayton Tune could start game 1, which means that there's a chance. And I feel like the McCoy re-signing was about like, hey, we need a veteran in here. But I don't think it was like,
well, and he was already under contract for this year, so he was re-signed last offseason before, like, he was signed for 2 years. And then, this was after Cliff and Keim had gotten their 5-year extension, so they were counting on Colt going to be there.
Right. And it just feels like this is so different. And, we'll see how this all works out, because it's just different this year. And I'm not sure if that he's the guy, right? Like, honestly, I don't know, man. It's just,
I'm not worried because, and I've told this before, you know what I absolutely do not want any part of? Clayton Tune playing quarterback before Kyler Murray gets back. I want no part of that at all. And honestly, I think I don't care that Colt McCoy's looking bad right now. I don't. Well, I want to see what happens in the preseason, 1. And 2, whether he's good right now honestly doesn't matter, because they're still all learning the offense.
Well, and 2, I think the reality is we know what, and I think it's something that we've talked about 100 times. We know what Colt McCoy is. Like, we know who Colt McCoy is. So there's really not a whole lot of questions, right? Like, what you're going to get out of McCoy. So that becomes the question: is going with the unknown of Clayton Tune a better choice than knowing what you're going to get out of Colt McCoy? Even in a different offense, it doesn't matter. Like, you're still going to get the same results. Like, he's still going to be a guy that's, if he plays, let's say 4 games, he's going to throw 3 touchdowns. He's going to throw 4 interceptions. Like, that's just, he's going to be a guy that completes 62% of his passes and that can't, misses some outside throws and makes some throws down the middle of the field where he can drive the ball still, that you're like, oh, he does have a good arm. It's just little stuff like that. Like, we know who he is. And so that's what the question becomes, is what do you want? Or are you willing to take the unknown? Because that's the thing. We know that a Colt McCoy-led team can go 1-3 in those 4 games and have and it's not good by any means, but, a 23rd to 25th ranked offense. What we don't know is if Clayton Tune can even get to that level. I mean, people don't realize how hard it is to play in the NFL. They're just like,
and to play like if Clayton Tune's at quarterback against Washington in that defensive front.
Well, and it's just everybody goes, well, look at, they're always going to be like, well, look at the outlier, right? Like, look at Brock Purdy. And you're like, yeah, look at Brock Purdy, but like,
Brock Purdy started playing midseason.
Right.
That's a big part of it.
Right. It is. And that's just kind of what it is. And, it's just looking at all of this and seeing how it goes. And for me, I'm comfortable either way, because I know what they're going to get in Colt McCoy, and I'm fine with it. And I am, I always embrace the chaos. And if they want to, if they're like, hey, let's get crazy with this. You're like, all right, man, like the Cardinals are going to be the most interesting team in the league. Like they may be awful, but they're going to be interesting.
I think McCoy, even like if it's close, I still go with McCoy personally because I think he's got the right mentality to steer the ship for Kyler's return. While there will, like, if Clayton Tune is even okay, there will be rumblings of, yes, he's our guy. Because fans are stupid. Like, we're dumb when the things like, he's yeah. And then we'll start talking about next year in training. It'd be like Davis Mills almost, I think.
Right.
And Davis Mills did some okay things. He's like Davis Mills or Gardner Minshew, and those are even guys that have established themselves as being able to be productive. But yeah. Anything else of note that you kind of take away from camp so far? I don't know if I would say that I noticed in my one practice that I was there that you could say that there are any particular individual standouts. Michael Wilson has stood out, I know. And honestly, I like where Marco Wilson's head's at right now.
And he's going to be a big one, I should say, not a good one. It's just, it's going to be interesting to see if those guys are coached up well by Jonathan Gannon or what the plan is. But he looks, so far, like you said, whether they look good or not, it's not the question, right? It's how they're progressing and how they're starting to fit in. And I feel like both him and even Christian Matthew to an extent have had really positive steps so far.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's wrap this show up. Kyler Murray talked to the media. Let's kind of dive into some of what he said. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Kyler Murray addressed the media, gave a lot of the things that we already heard. It was, partially because there's been no games. Kyler was a good interview. He was more open, but there was also no loss that he's stinging about. There was nobody asking about his video games. There was one interesting question, and it was from Doug Franz, and he wanted to kind of clarify something, and he said he didn't want to misquote him, and he talks about being more coachable, and Kyler's like, whoa. And so I said on the show, we'll continue to be coachable, and so there was a little bit of baiting there. Now, and it wasn't malintended. It was trying to get that out of the way. But there were some really, no one's kind of talked about it yet. And I was going to write it because I was going to go back and listen to it. There were some really interesting conceptual things that Kyler said that suggest vastly different things about two different coaching staffs over the last 2 years. Now, obviously, the whole timetable not there. He's going to come. He's taking it one day at a time, which feels like the exact opposite of what he said in Flight Plan, where the goal was obviously week one, and people took that and ran with it. Of course, he wants to come back and play week one as a competitor, but he knows he's not going to come back till he's ready. He doesn't know when that is. He doesn't know when he's going to be able to start playing football, doing football activities. He ran into Joe Burrow. He says you can't rush it, but when you know, you'll know. I was really intrigued, though, about, and I didn't get to ask him specifically. I wanted to, but there was enough. I didn't get to ask it. I wanted to ask what were some different things that I wanted to kind of compare the two coaching staffs without not bashing the previous one. But there's one thing that stood out is that he's really, really bought in to this coaching staff because he said the communication and of expectations from top to bottom is perfect. And so there's no question about what expectations are. If when it comes to offensive concepts. Like you see this look, you do this, you do this, you do this. And there's like a level of accountability for at every level. If you miss a block, this happens. If and there is communication about what everyone's supposed to do, and it feels like that wasn't happening with Cliff Kingsbury. Is that there was a large disconnect organizationally from top to bottom what was expected. Now, to some level, and we've said this, that Cliff was one who felt, okay, you're professionals, do your job, or we'll replace you. Gannon is process-oriented, and he said, no, everything matters. And I thought about it today, something he said, like, he sounds a lot like Steve Wilkes. He sounds a lot like Steve Wilkes with perhaps a little more buy-in. I'm not sure what it is, but Steve
a
Wilkes,
little more Bruce Arians, like
but Wilkes talked up like, and players love him too, but he talked a lot, kind of the same thing, but then
and to be fair, too,
lost the buy-in.
Right, but he's also had nothing but success outside of Arizona. So is it really just? I mean, it might have been too much too soon for Wilkes, and maybe it will be for Gannon as well, or maybe it won't. That'll be something we'll watch. But yeah, the process, the way things are going, to see Kyler's excitement level being here is a complete 180 from last year. And it was just to a point where relationships sour, whether they're, in life and in love, in business, whatever it is, like relationships sour. And I think that was something that happened in Arizona that doesn't just get discussed very much. And we can talk about and speculate on the root cause all day. The reality is the relationship itself had soured, and it feels like that Kyler's embracing the new relationships and they're embracing him back. And like you wrote about, in June or May or whenever, or no, it had to be in April, because that's right. Mike Florio said it was a terrible thing for the coach and GM not to be planning for the draft. When Oklahoma unveiled his Heisman statue, and how much that meant to Kyler. And it was a dig without being a dig at the old regime, right? Like, because he never felt like they had his back. Like, they talked a big game, but it's a different thing when you actually
Steve Keim's no longer GM, and guess what type of reports are no longer coming out of the organization?
Right. And
Magic.
So it's just, one of those situations where I think you're seeing a guy that has matured as he needed to, but also is feeling like he's in a better spot with coaches who are willing to listen and have his input, but also push him in ways that the other staff didn't. It almost felt like, and I've watched a lot of the 2019 to 2022 tape. It almost felt like that they couldn't decide on how to move forward. And so both sides were just kind of like, okay, we'll just do what we know works. And so they kind of just went back to, the basics, so to speak, or what had worked before. And that's where, as a coach, Cliff needed to evolve. As a player, Kyler needed to be pushed to evolve, and it didn't happen. And now, and the results were the results, and now you're moving forward from there. So it'll be interesting to see if that plays on the field or if it's just, lip service.
I've said this a few times. I don't remember if I've said it here on this show, but it's always felt like that Cliff was almost like just happy to have Kyler. Like, he tried, like, since he was a teenager, to get Kyler to be his quarterback, that he was just like, okay, thank you, Kyler, for being here. Do you? And Kyler's not that like, Kyler wants to be coached hard. He wants to be pushed. He wants to have specific expectations for him. And Cliff was like, I'm just glad you're here. Like, you're great. Now do stuff. Do stuff. Here's this. Take it. It's yours. Gannon is saying, this is what we want. They have a specific plan for him to be ready since he can't get physical reps. He talked about, and Kyler himself talked about how he's going through checks and calls in the mirror with himself. Like, I don't know if anyone else caught that. That's homework. He's doing homework at home that he's doing that sort. And the things that they put in place, and these are all things that the coaches have established with him, and they've made it very clear what they want out of him. And so this is the plan. Let's do this. The fact that they are pushing him is exactly what he's needed. Like, Cliff wasn't very good about holding people accountable. Like, he would call players out. That was never kind of his thing.
No,
his
and
coaching staff, and that ended up being a problem because they weren't winning. When you have a veteran, and you want the veterans to do it, but your coach has to establish that culture. And Gannon does that. And so, like, a guy misses a block, okay, he's going to get called out. Bruce Arians was really good about that. He had an accountability board. It was like everybody's mental mistakes and blown assignments was on display for everyone to see, not to shame them, but just to create a level of accountability to say, hey, your mistakes matter to everyone on a team. And I just love kind of how they're setting things up. I don't know. I hope it's successful, and I hope it doesn't go as badly, because the way this is set up feels like if they get just a little bit of success, this is exactly what you need to build long-term success.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, too, that one of the biggest faults of Cliff Kingsbury is always going to be, and you said it, it's that he values relationships too much. It's funny, and I know Steve Wilkes was in the middle, but it's funny that they went from a coach who basically utilized 75% of the team as, or viewed them as, replaceable commodities, to a guy in Cliff who didn't know how to separate his affinity for the players to be able to coach them up, or put them in a position of having to be pushed and things like that. And it's just really interesting, because it feels like Gannon, and again, this is based purely on 2 weeks of training camp. It feels like Gannon has that ability to find that sweet spot to be a guy who, straddles that line a little bit better. And for a team that just desperately needs that, they need their best players to feel emboldened to hold each other accountable and not feel like it's just a free-for-all, which is kind of what it felt like under Cliff. And it's not, taking shots at Cliff or anything like that. Like I said, it was the best thing about him in 19 and 20, and he was the right coach at the right time, but it ultimately what led to his downfall, because unless you're winning, having that mentality or treating players in that manner is not the best thing, right? Like, you have to be able to reel it back in and hold them accountable. And once the, toothpaste was out of the tube, so to speak, it was too late, right?
Yeah, it's just so interesting, kind of how Kyler's talking, the way he is. It feels like he's taking another step forward, but at the same time, he doesn't know when he's going to be back. I know I've been saying week one's not going to happen. I'm just really interested to see, is he going to come off PUP before, or if they're going to keep him on, had him be out for 4 weeks, then get him practicing, and then come back. And I've predicted a week 6 return. That kind of feels kind of like the sweet spot right now. based on current progress and everything that he's doing. But he's taking it one day at a time. He opened up about some of the things, like the first time he had to have a trainer bend his knee for him because he couldn't do it. Like there's
and I can tell you that's a real thing. Like you're like,
sure.
That's as far as I mean, somebody that's blown out their knee and had done the rehab. Now, mind you, the surgery, all of that's much better than I did it when I did it 20 years ago. But, the fact that you literally have somebody come over and and you're like, this is as far as I can bend my knee. And they're like, no, it's not here. And then they push it and you're like, what are you doing? It's going to snap in half. And then you're like, oh, it can go further. and it's just one of those things that you're just not used to. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he comes along and what he looks like and where he's at. But, again, from everything we've heard, it's been incredibly positive.
Yeah. So it continues to be, I can't wait till it gets back. Yeah. Whenever that is. All right, let's wrap this up. This edition of the Rise Up Here at Podcast, Special of Cardinals Talk on the web. This is episode 448. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Maybe we'll have another one. We got to get back in the groove of doing these, whether it's just me, whether it's Seth, whether it's bringing something else. I'm going to try and get, probably. I can probably record a show on Thursday, whether we can get Seth. Because one thing we haven't done our divisional ranking show this year yet, so we need to do that at some point. So we'll figure that out. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up Here Podcast. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.